The sound of a shotgun blast ripped through the stillness of Silver Creek, making Olivia Blackwood flinch despite the distance. 5 years in this dusty frontier town, and she still jumped at loud noises. Her hands trembled as she arranged bottles of laudanum on the apothecary shelf, trying to focus on the methodical task rather than the memories that threatened to surface. The year was 1878, and while the war had ended 13 years ago for Olivia, some battles never ceased. "Miss Blackwood, Mr." Peterson's voice startled her from behind the counter. "Mighty sorry to trouble you, but my Martha's cough is back something fierce." Olivia nodded and retrieved the medicine without speaking. Her silence had become her armor in Silver Creek, a simple nod, a shake of the head, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The townsfolk had grown accustomed to the mute woman who ran the apothecary, though rumors swirled about the darkness that must have stolen her voice. "Thank you kindly," Mr. Peterson said, placing coins on the counter. "Say, there's word of a cattle drive coming through, might be good for business." He tipped his hat and left, the bell above the door jingling in his wake. Olivia sighed. Cattle drives meant cowboys, and cowboys meant strangers who asked questions, who wouldn't understand her silence the way the townspeople had learned to. She moved to the window, watching dust rise on the horizon. The setting sun painted the distant mountains in shades of amber and purple. In another life, she might have found it beautiful. The next morning brought the unmistakable sounds of cattle and men to Silver Creek. Olivia opened the apothecary later than usual, hoping to avoid the initial commotion. She had just finished arranging her supplies when the bell above the door rang. A tall figure filled the doorframe, blocking the morning light. His silhouette slowly materialized into a man as he stepped inside broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten face that spoke of years under the open sky. Dark hair peeked from beneath a well-worn Stetson, and a thick layer of trail dust covered his denim and leather. What caught Olivia's attention, however, were his eyes, a startling blue that seemed out of place against his sun-darkened skin. "Morning, madam," he said, removing his hat. "Name's Thomas Ryder. Got myself a nasty cut that could use some attention." Olivia nodded, gesturing to a chair near the counter. He sat, rolling up his sleeve to reveal a jagged gash along his forearm. "Steer caught me on some barbed wire," he explained, watching as she gathered supplies. "You the doctor in these parts?" She shook her head, preparing a basin of water. "Apothecary, then?" When she nodded, he continued, "You're mighty young to be running such an establishment on your own." Olivia kept her eyes on her work, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, calloused and marked with old scars, the hands of a man who lived by them. "Not much for conversation, are you?" There was no judgment in his voice, just observation. She reached for a jar of salve, applying it carefully to the cleaned wound. The man Thomas watched her with curious eyes. "That's all right. Most folks talk too much anyway." A smile played at his lips. "Including me, I suppose." As she wrapped his arm with clean bandages, he continued, "I'll be in town a spell. Boss is negotiating to sell the herd to the railroad. Got any recommendations for a man looking for honest work while he waits?" Olivia finished the bandage, then hesitated before picking up a piece of paper and pencil from behind the counter. Her hand hovered over the page before she wrote, "The livery stable needs help." Thomas read her note, surprise flickering across his features. "Much obliged for the tip and for fixing me up." He placed coins on the counter. "I'd be grateful if you'd let me call on you again, for the bandage changing, of course." Something in his earnest expression made Olivia nod before she could think better of it. As he left, she realized it was the first real communication she'd initiated with a stranger in years. Over the next week, Thomas Ryder became a fixture in Silver Creek. He secured work at the livery stable, as Olivia had suggested, and made a point to pass by the apothecary each evening. Sometimes he'd purchase small items, a tin of salve, willow bark for headaches, but mostly he'd lean against the counter and talk. He spoke of the cattle drive from Texas, of the stars that guided them north, of the men he'd ridden with and the places he'd seen. He never pressed Olivia for responses beyond her nods and written notes, seeming content with her presence and attention. "You remind me of a wild Mustang I once tried to break," he said one evening as she closed shop. When she raised an eyebrow, he laughed. "Not in a bad way, just in how you watch everything, sizing up the world before deciding if it's safe." That horse ended up being the finest mount I ever had once she decided to trust me. Olivia felt a flush rise to her cheeks as she locked the door. Thomas tipped his hat and walked her to the small house behind the apothecary, as had become their routine. At her door, he paused. "There's a social at the church tomorrow evening. Would you consider attending? With me?" Olivia froze, panic fluttering in her chest. A social meant people questions, expectations to engage. She shook her head firmly. Disappointment crossed Thomas's face, but he recovered quickly. "Another time, perhaps. Good night, Miss Blackwood." As she watched him walk away, Olivia felt an unfamiliar ache. Part of her wanted to call him back to explain, but the words remained locked inside her, prisoners of a past she couldn't face. The next morning, Olivia woke to commotion in the town. From her window, she saw a group of riders enter Silver Creek, rough-looking men, different from the cowboys of the cattle drive. Their leader, a man with a shock of red hair and a scar bisecting his left cheek, surveyed the town with calculating eyes. A sense of foreboding settled over Olivia as she dressed and prepared to open the apothecary. By mid-morning, the town buzzed with news the men were bounty hunters, tracking a fugitive they believed was hiding in the area. The bell above her door jangled, and Olivia looked up to see Sheriff Mills entering, followed by the red-haired stranger. "Miss Blackwood, this here is Mr. Hawkins," the sheriff said uncomfortably. "He's got some questions for everyone in town." Hawkins stepped forward, eyes cold as they assessed her. "We're looking for a woman, killed a prominent man back in Missouri 5 years ago, vanished after, name of Olivia Brennan." Olivia's heart thundered in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral, grateful for years of practice in hiding her emotions. "Miss Blackwood don't talk," Sheriff Mills explained. "Hasn't said a word since she came to town 5 years back." "Is that so?" Hawkins' gaze sharpened. "Well, ain't that convenient? Mind if I look around?" Before she could respond, he was moving through the apothecary, opening drawers, examining bottles. "The woman I'm looking for was educated, knew medicines, worked as a nurse during the war." His eyes never left Olivia. "Sound like anyone you know, Sheriff?" Sheriff Mills shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Blackwood's been nothing but an asset to this town, Mr. Hawkins. I can't have you harassing her based on coincidence." "Course not," Hawkins agreed, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just doing my job. I'll be around if the lady suddenly finds her voice." After they left, Olivia's hands shook so badly she had to sit. 5 years of careful existence threatened to unravel. She needed to leave, to run again, but the thought of starting over, of another life built on silence and fear, felt unbearable. The bell rang again, and Olivia's head jerked up, terror making her pulse race. But it was Thomas who entered, concern etched on his features. "I saw Hawkins leaving. Are you all right?" He crossed to her, kneeling to meet her eyes. "He's been questioning everyone, seems mighty interested in you." Olivia shook her head, unable to convey the storm of emotions inside her. Thomas reached out slowly, as if approaching that wild Mustang he'd mentioned, and covered her trembling hand with his own. "Whatever's troubling you, I want to help." His blue eyes held no judgment, just a steadiness that made her want to lean into him. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I care what happens to you." She pulled her hand away to write on her pad. "You can't help." "Let me try," he insisted. "Whatever you're running from." Olivia stood abruptly, shaking her head. She gestured toward the door, asking him to leave. Thomas rose, hurt evident in his expression. "All right, but I'm not giving up on you, Olivia Blackwood. Some things are worth fighting for." After he left, Olivia closed the apothecary and retreated to her house. She pulled out the small trunk from under her bed, the only possession she'd brought from her old life. Inside lay a faded photograph of a younger Olivia in a nurse's uniform, standing beside a handsome Union officer. Beneath it was a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Prominent Doctor Murdered Nurse Suspected." Tears blurred her vision as memories flooded back the hospital in St. Louis, the wounded soldiers, Dr. James Montgomery with his charming smile and wandering hands. The night he'd come to her quarters drunk, his rage when she'd refused him, the paperweight she'd grabbed in defense that had struck his temple with fatal force. She'd run, changing her name from Brennan to Blackwood, finding this remote town where no one knew her. She'd stopped speaking, afraid that her voice might be recognized, that her words might somehow betray her. Silence had become her salvation. Now Hawkins threatened everything, and worse, Thomas Ryder had awakened feelings she'd thought long-dead longings for connection, for a life beyond mere survival. A knock at her door startled her from her reverie. Hastily hiding the trunk, she approached cautiously, relief washing over her when she saw Thomas through the window. She opened the door but remained blocking the entrance. "I know you want to be left alone," he said quietly, "but I couldn't stop thinking about you." Hawkins and his men are drinking at the saloon, talking openly about the bounty on this Olivia Brennan. $10,000. Olivia's blood ran cold. Such a sum would motivate even the most ambivalent citizen to take a closer look at the mute apothecary. "I've got a cabin," Thomas continued. "About half a day's ride from here, remote. You'd be safe there while we figure things out." She shook her head, gesturing around her. This was her home, her life. "Olivia." The sound of her name on his lips made her still. "I don't know what happened in your past, and I'm not asking you to tell me. But I know a hunted look when I see one. These men won't give up easily, especially with that kind of money involved." He was right, and they both knew it. Reluctantly, Olivia nodded. "Pack only what you need. I'll come for you before dawn." The night passed in anxious preparation. Olivia filled a small bag with essentials, clothes, medicines, the contents of her trunk. As promised, Thomas appeared at her back door just as the eastern sky began to lighten. "Ready," he whispered. They slipped through town, keeping to shadows. Thomas had saddled 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding and a steady mare for Olivia. They rode out as the first rays of sun touched Silver Creek, heading northwest into the foothills. Olivia hadn't ridden in years, but her body remembered the rhythm. They maintained a steady pace through the morning, Thomas occasionally glancing back to ensure she was managing. By midday, the terrain had grown more rugged, pine forests replacing the open plains. "Not much further," Thomas assured her during a brief rest. "Cabins just beyond that ridge." The structure that eventually came into view was modest, but solid, a single-room cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping, with a small corral and lean-to for the horses. A stream burbled nearby, and the surrounding pines offered natural concealment. "It's not much," Thomas said as he helped her dismount, "but it's sturdy. Built it myself 2 years ago." Olivia looked at him questioningly. "I come back between drives," he explained, leading the horses to the corral. "Not everyone's cut out for constant wandering. Been thinking of settling more permanently." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a bed built into the corner opposite. A table with 2 chairs sat beneath the window, and shelves held supplies and a few books. "Make yourself at home," Thomas said, bringing in her bag. "I'll get a fire going." As he busied himself with the hearth, Olivia explored the small space. It was undeniably masculine, yet had a welcoming quality hand-carved furniture, a colorful quilt on the bed, even a small shelf of books. She ran her fingers along the spines. Milton, Thoreau, Whitman. "My mother was a schoolteacher," Thomas explained, noticing her interest. "Made sure I appreciated words, even if I spent more time with horses than books." There was an intimacy to sharing this space that made Olivia acutely aware of their situation alone, miles from town, with a man she barely knew yet somehow trusted. Thomas seemed to sense her unease. "I'll sleep in the lean-to," he said, nodding toward the door. "You'll have your privacy." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in her chest as she nodded her thanks. They settled into a cautious routine over the next few days. Thomas hunted and maintained the cabin while Olivia cooked and organized his meager medical supplies with professional efficiency. They communicated through her written notes and his increasingly adept interpretation of her expressions. On the fourth evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Thomas broke their comfortable silence. "I rode close to town today. Hawkins and his men are still there, asking questions. The sheriff's growing suspicious about your absence." Olivia wrote, "I can't stay here forever." "No," Thomas agreed, "but running isn't the answer either. These men won't stop. If not here, they'll find you somewhere else." She stared into the fire, the weight of 5 years of running suddenly unbearable. On the paper she wrote, "I killed a man." Thomas was silent for a long moment. "I figured it was something like that. Was it murder?" Olivia shook her head vehemently, then hesitated before writing, "Self-defense." "He attacked me. No one would have believed me. He was respected. I was just a nurse." Thomas read her words, his jaw tightening. During the war, after St. Louis Hospital, he was a doctor. Understanding dawned in Thomas's eyes. "And you haven't spoken since." Olivia wrote, "My voice could identify me, and—" She paused, pencil hovering over the paper. Thomas waited patiently. "And I screamed when it happened," she finally wrote. "I hear it every time I try to speak." Thomas moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "Olivia, what happened wasn't your fault. You defended yourself against a man who tried to harm you. That's not murder, that's survival." Tears slipped down her cheeks as 5 years of pent-up emotion broke free. Thomas gathered her into his arms, holding her as she sobbed silently against his chest. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, his hands gentle as they stroked her back. "You've been carrying this alone for too long," he murmured into her hair. "Let me help you bear it." In that moment, with firelight casting shadows across the cabin walls and Thomas's arms around her, Olivia felt something crack inside her, the shell she'd built to protect herself splintering under the weight of his kindness. The next morning brought clarity with the dawn. Olivia woke in her bed, the quilt tucked around her, with only fragmented memories of Thomas carrying her there after she'd cried herself to exhaustion. She found him outside, chopping wood with methodical precision. He paused when he saw her, concern evident in his expression. "How are you feeling?" Olivia managed a small smile and nodded, indicating she was okay. The vulnerability of the previous night hung between them, changing the texture of their interaction. "I've been thinking," Thomas said, setting down the axe. "There might be a way to clear your name." She tilted her head questioningly. If it was self-defense, there might be evidence, witnesses. The truth has a way of surfacing, given enough time and effort. Olivia shook her head, writing on the small slate she'd taken to carrying. "It was 5 years ago. His family is powerful." "Maybe so, but justice doesn't have an expiration date." Thomas's conviction was palpable. "What was his name, the doctor?" After a moment's hesitation, she wrote, "James Montgomery." Thomas nodded. "I have a friend in St. Louis, former ranger turned Pinkerton, owes me a favor. I could send a telegram, ask him to look into Montgomery's death discreetly." Hope, dangerous, fragile hope flickered in Olivia's chest. Could there be a way back to her old life? A way to reclaim her voice, her name, her freedom? "It's worth trying," Thomas urged, seeing her expression. "What's the alternative? Running forever? Living in silence?" Slowly, Olivia nodded her agreement. "I'll ride to the next town over," Thomas decided. "There's a telegraph office there. I can be back by nightfall." As Thomas prepared to leave, Olivia felt a growing unease. Being alone at the cabin suddenly seemed daunting, despite the remote location. Thomas sensed her anxiety. "Take this," he said, offering her a revolver. "Just in case. I doubt anyone will find this place, but better safe than sorry." The weight of the gun was unfamiliar in Olivia's hands. She set it on the table, hoping she wouldn't need it. "Bar the door after I leave," Thomas instructed. "I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more when I return. Don't open for anyone else." After he departed, the cabin felt oppressively quiet. Olivia busied herself with chores, trying to ignore the growing shadows as afternoon waned into evening. When a twig snapped outside, she froze, ears straining, another sound, a horse nickering softly. Relief flooded her. Thomas had returned early. She moved to the door, then hesitated, remembering his warning. Peering through a crack in the shutters, her blood turned to ice. 3 riders approached the cabin, and leading them was Hawkins, his red hair unmistakable even in the dimming light. Olivia scrambled back, mind racing. How had they found her? She grabbed the revolver with trembling hands, checking that it was loaded as she'd seen Thomas do. A heavy knock rattled the door. "Miss Blackwood, or should I say Miss Brennan?" Hawkins's voice was almost jovial. "We know you're in there. Why not make this easy on everyone?" Olivia remained silent, backing toward the rear window. "Your cowboy friend wasn't as clever as he thought," Hawkins continued. "Asking questions about you in Pinecrest. Word travels fast. Thomas, they must have intercepted him. Fear for his safety momentarily overshadowed her own." "He's fine, in case you're wondering," Hawkins called, as if reading her thoughts. "For now, sheriff's holding him in Silver Creek, obstruction of justice, aiding a fugitive, serious charges." The rear window was small, but Olivia thought she could fit through. If she could reach the lean-to, maybe take a horse. "I'm losing patience, Miss Brennan." Hawkins's tone hardened. "Come out now, or we burn this place to the ground." Olivia's mind raced. Even if she escaped, Thomas would pay the price. The thought of him suffering for helping her was unbearable. Perhaps if she surrendered, explained what happened. A new voice joined the conversation outside, deep, authoritative. "That's enough, Hawkins." Peering through the shutters again, Olivia saw a fourth rider had joined the group, an older man in a marshal's coat. "This is my bounty, Marshal," Hawkins protested. "Fair and square." "There is no bounty," the marshal replied, dismounting. "Not anymore." Confused, Olivia watched as the marshal approached the cabin door. "Miss Brennan, my name is Marshal Robert Kane. I'm here with news from St. Louis. You're no longer wanted for questioning in Dr. Montgomery's death. New evidence has come to light." Disbelief kept Olivia rooted to the spot. "Your friend, Mr. Ryder, sent a telegram that raised some interesting questions," Kane continued, "prompted a review of the case. Turns out you weren't the only nurse Dr. Montgomery attacked. 3 others have come forward. And his autopsy shows defensive wounds on his hands consistent with your statement to the hospital matron before you disappeared." Hope and suspicion warred within Olivia. "This could be a trick to lure her out. I have the official documents," Kane added, "and your friend Ryder is on his way, should be here shortly." As if summoned by his name, the sound of approaching hoofbeats reached Olivia's ears. Moments later, Thomas's voice called out, "Olivia, it's me." "It's over, you're safe." Still cautious, she approached the door. 3 knocks, pause, 2 more, she whispered to herself, remembering their signal. The pattern came promptly: 3 distinct knocks, a pause, then 2 more. Olivia unbarred the door with shaking hands. Thomas stood there, face drawn with worry but eyes alight with triumph. Behind him, Marshal Kane held out a packet of papers. Hawkins and his men remained mounted, frustration evident in their postures. "It's true," Thomas said softly. "You're free." Olivia's knees weakened, and Thomas caught her as she swayed. The reality was too overwhelming to process. 5 years of hiding, of silence, ended in a single moment. Marshal Kane approached, respectful of her obvious shock. "Miss Brennan, I owe you an apology on behalf of the law. You should have been protected, not persecuted. Dr. Montgomery's family tried to bury the truth, but justice has prevailed." Hawkins spat on the ground. "This is horseshit. I tracked her for months." "And you'll leave with nothing," Kane replied firmly. "The bounty's been rescinded. The case is closed." Olivia barely registered their departure, her focus entirely on the papers in her hands, official documentation of her innocence. Statements from other nurses corroborating Montgomery's pattern of behavior, the revised findings on his death ruling it justifiable homicide in self-defense. "How?" she whispered, the word rasping from her throat after years of disuse. Thomas's eyes widened at the sound of her voice. "My friend in St. Louis, he found the hospital matron. She remembered your statement before you ran. She helped locate other victims who'd been silenced by Montgomery's family." Olivia's hand trembled as she touched her throat, the unfamiliar sensation of speaking both terrifying and exhilarating. "You did this, for me." "I couldn't let you run anymore," Thomas said simply. "Everyone deserves the truth." That night, after Marshal Kane departed with a subdued Hawkins and his men, Olivia and Thomas sat by the fire in the cabin, the weight of the day's events settling around them like a physical presence. "What will you do now?" Thomas asked. "You could go back to nursing. Your reputation's been restored." Olivia considered this, testing her voice carefully. I don't know, Silver Creek has become home in its way. The townspeople would welcome you back, Thomas assured her, especially once they know the truth, and my silence, my deception. They'll understand. People are more forgiving than you might think. Olivia stared into the flames, contemplating a future she'd never allowed herself to imagine, one where she could speak freely, use her real name, live without constantly looking over her shoulder. What about you? She asked, meeting Thomas's gaze. Will you return to the cattle drives? He smiled, the firelight accentuating the lines around his eyes. I meant what I said about settling down, been saving to buy land near Silver Creek, good grazing, water rights, could raise horses instead of chasing cattle. The possibility hung between them, unspoken but palpable. I should thank you, Olivia said softly, for believing in me, for staying when everyone else would have left. Thomas reached across the space between them, taking her hand. Some people are worth waiting for. In that moment, with the fire crackling and the night pressing against the cabin windows, Olivia made a decision. 5 years of silence had cost her enough. She wouldn't waste another moment. Thomas, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word, I don't want to be alone anymore. He drew her gently to him, his eyes never leaving hers. You won't be, not ever again. Their first kiss was tentative, a question asked and answered in the space of a heartbeat. The second was a promise, sealing something that had been building between them since that first day in the apothecary. The journey back to Silver Creek the next day was filled with both anticipation and trepidation. Olivia rode beside Thomas, rehearsing explanations in her mind, uncertain of her reception after her abrupt disappearance. They reached town by mid-afternoon, the familiar buildings both welcoming and intimidating. People stopped to stare as they rode down the main street. The mute apothecary returned, and speaking in hushed tones to the cowboy at her side. Sheriff Mills was the first to approach as they dismounted outside the apothecary. Miss Blackwood, or should I say Miss Brennan, Marshal Kane filled me in. His expression was a mixture of confusion and respect. Seems we all misjudged your situation. I'm sorry for the deception, Olivia said, her voice still rough from disuse. I was afraid, understandable given the circumstances. The sheriff nodded to Thomas. Ryder, looks like you were right about her innocence. Always trust a cowboy's instincts about people, Thomas replied with a smile. Word spread quickly through Silver Creek. By evening, the apothecary had seen a steady stream of visitors, some curious, others genuinely concerned for the woman they'd known only through gestures and written notes. Mrs. Peterson brought a pie. Always knew you had your reasons, dear, just glad you're safe. The Reverend offered prayers of thanksgiving for her exoneration. Even old Mr. Gunderson, who rarely left his farm, came to express his support. Town needs its apothecary, he grumbled. Don't matter what name you use. Throughout it all, Thomas remained at her side, a steady presence as she navigated this new reality, being Olivia Brennan again, using her voice, sharing parts of her story. Later, as they sat on the porch behind the apothecary watching the sunset, Olivia felt a peace she hadn't known in years. They accepted me, she marveled, even knowing I lied. People respect strength, Thomas said, and surviving what you did took extraordinary strength. She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid warmth. What happens now, that depends. He turned to face her. I put a deposit on that land I mentioned, 100 acres west of town, good water, good soil. You're really staying, was planning to before all this happened. Now I have even more reason. Thomas took her hand. I know it's fast, Olivia, we've only known each other a short while, but I think what we have is rare. I don't want to waste it. Olivia's heart quickened. What are you asking? Come see the land with me tomorrow, help me plan where to build. Not just a cabin, a proper house. His blue eyes held her steadily. A home. The implication was clear, and for a moment, old fears threatened to resurface, fears of trusting, of being vulnerable, of building a life that could be taken away. But then Thomas smiled, that same patient smile he'd offered her that first day in the apothecary, and Olivia made her choice. Yes, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Show me our land. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect for their expedition. Thomas arrived early, 2 horses saddled, and provisions packed for a day's exploration. Olivia had spent the night considering their future, the possibilities both thrilling and terrifying. They rode west out of Silver Creek, following Cottonwood Creek upstream into gently rolling hills. After an hour, Thomas led them over a rise, and Olivia caught her breath at the view. Before them stretched a natural basin, protected by hills on 3 sides. A clear stream cut through its center, feeding a small pond before continuing downstream. Groves of cottonwoods offered shade, while open meadows glowed golden in the morning sun. "This is it," Thomas said, pride evident in his voice. 100 acres from that ridge to the creek bend. They dismounted, and Thomas helped Olivia down, his hands lingering at her waist. She turned slowly, taking in the panorama. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I thought the house could go there." Thomas pointed to a flat area near the largest cottonwood grove. Sheltered from winter winds but with a view of the whole valley, good spot for a garden to the south. Olivia walked to the indicated spot, imagination transforming the empty space into a home, windows catching the morning light, a porch wrapping around, perhaps a swing where they could watch the sunset. "Barn and corrals over there," Thomas continued, gesturing to a level area near the stream. "Good drainage, easy access to water. Could put in an irrigation system for crops here." His enthusiasm was infectious, and Olivia found herself adding details to the vision. "We could plant fruit trees along that southern slope, and herbs I could grow medicinals instead of ordering them." Thomas smiled at her use of "we," taking her hand as they walked the property. "What do you think? Could you see yourself here?" Olivia stopped, turning to face him. The question wasn't just about the land, and they both knew it. "Thomas, before I answer, there's something you should know." She took a deep breath, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "What happened with Dr. Montgomery, it left scars, not just the silence, but trust, intimacy." Her cheeks flushed, but she pressed on. "I may not be the wife you deserve." Understanding dawned in Thomas's eyes, followed by a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Olivia, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. Marriage is partnership, friendship, building something together." He gestured to the land around them. "Like this place. It's rough now, needs work, patience, but I see what it could become, same as I see who we could be together." Tears pricked Olivia's eyes. "And if I'm never ready for certain things, then we'll find our own way of loving," Thomas said simply. "There's more than one path to happiness." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object. "I've carried this since Kansas City. Walked past a jeweler's window and couldn't leave without it, though I had no notion then who it might be for." In his palm lay a ring, a simple band of gold with a small pearl nestled between 2 tiny sapphires. "It's not fancy," he said apologetically, "but pearls are formed through hardship, coming out stronger and more beautiful. Reminded me of you." Olivia stared at the ring, then at the man holding it. 5 years ago, her life had shattered in a moment of violence. She'd rebuilt herself in silence, believing that safety meant isolation. Now this man, this gentle, patient cowboy, offered her a different kind of safety, one built on understanding and acceptance. "Ask me," she whispered. Thomas took her hand, his calloused thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Olivia Brennan, will you build this life with me? Will you be my wife?" "Yes," she said, the word emerging clear and strong. "Yes, I will." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit. Thomas lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with reverence that brought fresh tears to her eyes. They spent the day exploring their future home, planning and dreaming. Thomas showed her the spring that would provide their water, the meadows where horses would graze, the copse where wild berries grew in summer. As the sun began its descent, they sat beneath the great cottonwood that would shade their future home, sharing a simple meal from Thomas's saddlebag. "I'll speak with Reverend Collins tomorrow," Thomas said. "Unless you want to wait." Olivia considered this. "I don't need a grand wedding, just us, perhaps a few friends from town." 2 weeks, Thomas suggested. "Give me time to start on the house foundation at least." "I want you to have a proper home to come to." "I can help build," Olivia insisted. "I'm stronger than I look," Thomas laughed. "Of that, I have no doubt." They rode back to Silver Creek as twilight settled over the plains, the future unfurling before them like the star-strewn sky overhead. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Thomas began construction on their house, hiring men from town to help with the foundation and frame. Olivia divided her time between the apothecary and the homestead, learning to use her voice again as she coordinated supplies and made decisions about their home. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek, met with enthusiasm from a community that had witnessed their unusual courtship. Mrs. Peterson organized a home blessing where the women of town presented quilts, kitchenware, and preserved foods for the new household. The men contributed tools, furniture, and labor toward the house raising. Thomas threw himself into building with single-minded determination. By the end of the first week, the foundation was complete. By the end of the second, the frame stood strong against the prairie sky and the roof was nearly finished. "It won't be completely done," he apologized as they inspected the progress 3 days before the wedding. "But it'll be livable. We can finish the details together." Olivia walked through the framed rooms, already feeling at home in the space they'd designed together. A large main room would serve as kitchen and living area with a stone fireplace as its heart. 2 bedrooms extended off one side the master and a smaller room that might someday belong to a child. A covered porch wrapped around the front and side, offering views of both sunrise and sunset. "It's perfect," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "More than I ever imagined having again." On their wedding day, Olivia woke in her room behind the apothecary for the last time. Mrs. Peterson and several other women arrived to help her prepare, bringing a dress they'd secretly altered for the occasion, cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant. "Something borrowed," Mrs. Peterson said, pinning a cameo brooch to Olivia's collar. "Been in my family 3 generations." "Something blue," added young Sally from the general store, presenting a ribbon to tie back Olivia's hair. As they helped arrange her hair and dress, Olivia felt a surge of gratitude for these women who had accepted her twice, first as the silent apothecary, and now as the woman with a complicated past. The ceremony took place at noon beneath the cottonwood tree on Thomas and Olivia's land. Reverend Collins officiated, his weathered Bible open to the familiar passages about love and faithfulness. The entire town seemed to have made the journey, forming a semicircle around the couple as they exchanged vows. When asked to speak her promises, Olivia's voice rang clear across the homestead. "I, Olivia Brennan, take you, Thomas Ryder, to be my husband, to share in your dreams and support your hopes, to respect your silence and celebrate your words. To build with you a home of truth and trust from this day forward." Thomas's eyes shone as he responded with his own vows, simple but heartfelt. When Reverend Collins pronounced them husband and wife, the gathered community erupted in cheers that scattered birds from the nearby trees. The celebration continued through the afternoon tables set up under the trees, food contributed by every household in Silver Creek, music from fiddles and harmonicas as the sun began its descent. As twilight approached, the guests gradually departed, leaving the newlyweds alone at their homestead. Thomas led Olivia to the porch of their new home where he'd set 2 chairs facing the sunset. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ryder," he said softly, bringing her hand to his lips. Olivia smiled at the new name, at the man beside her, at the life stretching before them. "It feels right," she said. "Being here, being us." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky transformed from blue to gold to deep purple, the first stars appearing like distant promises. "I keep thinking about silence," Olivia said eventually, "how I used it to hide, to protect myself. But there are different kinds of silence, aren't there? The frightened kind I lived in for years, and this kind," she gestured between them, "where words aren't needed because understanding goes deeper." Thomas nodded, his hand finding hers. "Some things are too important for words." Later, as they prepared for their first night in their new home, Olivia felt nervousness return. Thomas sensed her tension as she moved around the bedroom, straightening items that didn't need straightening. "Olivia," he said gently, Nothing happens tonight that you don't want. Remember what I said, we'll find our own way. Relief flooded her at his understanding. That night they lay side by side in their new bed, Thomas's arm a comforting weight across her waist, her head tucked against his shoulder. It wasn't what most would expect of a wedding night, but it was perfect for them, a beginning built on respect and patience. In the weeks that followed, they settled into the rhythms of married life. Thomas continued work on the house while starting to build his horse breeding operation. Olivia established a new medicinal herb garden and rode into town 3 days a week to maintain the apothecary. Their life together evolved naturally, each day bringing new discoveries about one another. Thomas learned that Olivia hummed when she worked in her garden, often unaware she was making any sound at all. Olivia discovered that Thomas had an unexpected talent for carving, his large hands creating delicate wooden animals and figures in the evenings by the fire. Physical intimacy developed at its own pace. What began as hand-holding and chaste kisses gradually deepened as Olivia's trust grew. There were difficult moments, nightmares that left her trembling, memories triggered by unexpected touches, but Thomas's unwavering patience created a safe space for healing. 3 months after their wedding, Olivia realized that she no longer flinched when Thomas reached for her, that she found herself seeking his touch rather than merely accepting it. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky, she made a decision. Taking his hand, she led him inside to their bedroom without a word. In the soft lamplight, she faced him with determination in her eyes. "I'm ready," she said simply, "to try." Thomas's expression held a mixture of surprise and tenderness. "Are you certain?" Olivia nodded. "I trust you." "Completely." That night marked another beginning in their marriage, as Thomas showed her with infinite gentleness that physical love could be healing rather than harmful, a communion rather than a conquest. Afterwards, lying in his arms, Olivia felt tears slip down her cheeks, not from pain or fear, but from the profound realization that she was whole again, that what had been broken could indeed be mended. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. Thomas brushed away her tears with his thumb. "For what? For staying, for waiting, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." As autumn gave way to winter, their home became a haven against the prairie's harsh weather. They completed the interior finishings together, Olivia adding colorful touches with quilts and curtains, Thomas crafting furniture that would last generations. In town, Olivia's apothecary flourished as her ability to speak with patients about their ailments improved her effectiveness. She began teaching Sally from the general store about herbal remedies, recognizing in the young woman the same interest in healing that had led Olivia to nursing years ago. Thomas's horse breeding business showed promise as well. His first acquisitions, 2 quality mares and a stallion with impressive bloodlines, drew attention from neighboring ranchers. His reputation for fair dealing and knowledge of horseflesh spread beyond Silver Creek, bringing buyers from as far as Denver. Winter evenings found them by the fireplace, Thomas reading aloud from his books while Olivia worked on mending or prepared herbs. Sometimes they simply talked, sharing stories from their pasts that they'd never told anyone else. Olivia spoke of her childhood in Ohio, her father's death that had left the family struggling, her decision to become a nurse during the war. Thomas told her of growing up on a small farm in Kentucky, losing his parents to typhoid, finding his way west with nothing but determination and skill with horses. "We're both orphans who found our way," Olivia observed one night. "Maybe that's why we understand each other." Thomas smiled at the insight. "And why we know the value of building family where you find it." The mention of family hung in the air between them, unaddressed but increasingly present in their thoughts. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal. The land around their home burst into life, wildflowers carpeting the meadows, new foals wobbling beside their mothers in the corral, Olivia's herb garden flourishing under her attentive care. With the warmer weather came travelers along the nearby trail, some stopping at their homestead for directions or to rest their horses. Thomas and Olivia found themselves enjoying these brief connections to the wider world, occasionally inviting travelers to stay for a meal and share news from distant places. One such visitor, a doctor traveling to Denver, took particular interest in Olivia's medicinal knowledge. After observing her treat a field hand's infected cut, he expressed admiration for her technique. "You have training," he noted, "more than the usual home remedies." "I was a nurse," Olivia acknowledged. "During and after the war," the doctor nodded thoughtfully. "We need skilled medical practitioners out here. Have you considered offering more than apothecary services? This region has few doctors, and even fewer with your knowledge of herbal treatments." The suggestion lingered in Olivia's mind after the doctor continued his journey. That evening, she broached the subject with Thomas. "What would you think if I expanded my practice, not just mixing medicines but treating patients more directly?" Thomas considered this. "Like a doctor's assistant or a midwife, something between the two, perhaps. Using both my nursing training and what I've learned about natural remedies." She hesitated. "It would mean more responsibility, more people coming here sometimes." "It's your calling," Thomas said without hesitation. "If you feel drawn to do more, you should. This home is large enough to accommodate a small treatment room if needed." His support warmed her heart. "I'd need to study more, order medical texts, then we'll do that." Thomas smiled. "Besides, I've seen how you fuss when I get so much as a splinter. Might as well put those mothering instincts to good use for the whole community." Olivia laughed, but his casual mention of mothering struck a chord. Nearly a year into their marriage, it was a topic they'd yet to discuss directly. "Thomas," she began carefully, "when you mention mothering, have you thought about children for us?" His expression grew serious. "I have, but I wasn't sure if you wanted that, given everything." Olivia moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. "I've been thinking about it too. For a long time, I couldn't imagine bringing a child into my world of running and hiding. But now," she looked around their home at the life they'd built together. "Now I can see it, a little boy with your blue eyes or a girl with your strength." Thomas's face lit with a joy that took her breath away. "Truly, you want to try?" "I do," Olivia confirmed, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "I'm ready for that adventure if you are." His answer came in the form of a kiss that spoke volumes about his own hopes for their future. Summer brought the expansion of both their dreams. Thomas's horse breeding operation grew with the addition of a partnership with a renowned breeder from Kentucky, who sent 2 exceptional mares to cross with Thomas's stallion. The arrangement promised to establish the Ryder name in quality horseflesh throughout the territory. Olivia converted the smaller bedroom into a treatment space, ordering examination equipment and medical texts from Denver. Word spread that the apothecary was now offering expanded services, and patients began making the journey to the homestead for treatment of everything from difficult pregnancies to complicated wounds. By late summer, their efforts were bearing fruit. Thomas's first crop of foals showed remarkable quality, attracting buyers willing to pay premium prices. Olivia's medical practice gained respect throughout the region, with even the doctor in the next county referring certain cases to her care. What hadn't yet happened was the child they'd hoped for. As autumn approached again, Olivia found herself counting days and feeling disappointment each month. She tried to hide her concern, but Thomas knew her too well. "It will happen when it's meant to," he assured her one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over her abdomen. "We're in no rush," Olivia sighed. "I know, it's just, I want to give you a family, to give us both what we lost." Thomas propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with serious eyes. "Olivia, you've already given me a family. You, us, this home we've built. Everything else is a blessing, not a requirement." His words eased the pressure she'd placed on herself, allowing her to relax into the life they were already living rather than fixating on what might be missing. As the seasons turned, their second winter together proved even more content than the first. The house, now fully finished and furnished, stood warm against the prairie storms. Their businesses thrived despite the weather, with Thomas focusing on training during the indoor months and Olivia treating the inevitable winter illnesses that swept through the community. It was during the deepest cold of January, with snow piled high around their homestead, that Olivia woke one morning with a different feeling of certainty that something had changed. She said nothing to Thomas as he prepared to check on the horses, wanting to be sure before raising hopes. By the time the first crocuses pushed through the melting snow in late March, there was no denying the gentle swell of her abdomen or the glow that seemed to emanate from within her. Thomas's joy when she finally confirmed what he'd begun to suspect was boundless. "A baby," he marveled, placing his hand reverently on her stomach. "Our baby." Olivia covered his hand with her own, "Due in September by my calculations." Thomas immediately threw himself into preparations, expanding their bedroom to make space for a cradle, carving wooden toys in the evenings, ensuring the house was as comfortable and safe as possible for Olivia as her pregnancy progressed. The community rallied around them as well. Mrs. Peterson began knitting tiny garments. The blacksmith's wife, who had borne 7 children of her own, provided practical advice and comfort during Olivia's bouts of morning sickness. Even Sheriff Mills made a point of riding out more frequently, checking that all was well at the increasingly prosperous Ryder homestead. Summer found Olivia's garden at its peak production, with medicinal herbs thriving alongside vegetables for their table. Though her growing belly made some tasks more challenging, she insisted on maintaining her practice, with Thomas's help for the more strenuous cases. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him when he fretted about her workload. "Most of them while continuing to work fields or tend homes." Nevertheless, Thomas hired a local girl to help with household tasks and assist in the apothecary, giving Olivia more time to rest as her September due date approached. Their baby arrived on a golden autumn day, much like the one when they had exchanged their wedding vows 2 years earlier. Olivia's labor began at dawn, with Thomas sending their helper galloping for Mrs. Peterson, who had assisted at countless births. By midday, Olivia's pains had intensified to the point where even her medical training couldn't prepare her for the experience. Thomas remained by her side, supporting her through each contraction, his strength never wavering despite the fear evident in his eyes. "You're doing beautifully, Mrs. Peterson encouraged as the afternoon waned. "Won't be much longer now." As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows through the bedroom window, Olivia gathered her remaining strength for the final push that would bring their child into the world. Thomas held her hand, whispering words of love and encouragement as she worked with the ancient rhythms of birth. With a final, tremendous effort, their daughter entered the world red-faced and indignant, her powerful cry filling the room with the most beautiful sound Thomas and Olivia had ever heard. "A girl, Mrs. Peterson announced, efficiently cleaning and swaddling the infant before placing her in Olivia's trembling arms. "And a strong one at that." Thomas stared in wonder at the tiny face, tears streaming unashamedly down his cheeks. "She's perfect," he whispered, "just like her mother." Exhausted but euphoric, Olivia traced a finger along their daughter's delicate features, the button nose, the wisp of dark hair, the perfect miniature fingers that curled reflexively around Thomas's offered thumb. "Grace," Olivia said softly. "Her name is Grace." Thomas nodded, understanding the significance of the name Grace had brought them together, had given them second chances, had blessed them now with this miracle. "Grace Margaret Ryder," he affirmed, adding his mother's name as they had discussed. "Welcome home, little one." In the days that followed, their home adjusted to its newest member. Grace proved to be a good-natured baby, with her father's blue eyes and what promised to be her mother's determined spirit. Thomas became adept at walking the floors with her at night, singing old Kentucky ballads in his deep voice when she fussed. Visitors came to meet the newest resident of Silver Creek, bringing gifts and good wishes. Olivia found herself overwhelmed at times by the genuine affection shown by a community that had once known her only as the silent, mysterious apothecary. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked Thomas one evening as they sat on their porch, Grace sleeping peacefully in her father's arms. When you first met me, this life we have now, Thomas considered the question. Not the specifics, perhaps, but I knew there was something special about you from that first day, something worth discovering. Olivia leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. I was so broken then. So afraid. Not broken, Thomas corrected gently, just silent, waiting for the right moment to speak again. As the stars emerged overhead, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the trauma that had stolen her voice to the love that had restored it. From hiding behind silence to finding her true self in the family she and Thomas had created, Grace stirred in her father's arms, her tiny face turning instinctively toward her mother. Olivia reached for her daughter, cradling her close as Thomas wrapped an arm around them both. I love you, Olivia said, the words flowing easily now after years of silence. Both of you more than I ever thought possible. Thomas pressed a kiss to her temple, and we love you, always will. As night settled fully over their homestead, the Ryder family remained on their porch, wrapped in the peaceful silence of shared contentment, not the fearful silence of secrets, but the blessed silence of complete understanding. In the years that followed, the Ryder homestead flourished. Thomas's horse breeding operation expanded into one of the most respected in Colorado territory, attracting buyers from as far as California and St. Louis. Olivia's medical practice grew alongside it, with a proper clinic eventually built adjacent to their home. Grace thrived under the loving attention of both parents, developing into a curious, adventurous child with her father's affinity for horses and her mother's interest in healing. By the time she was 5, she was already helping Olivia sort herbs and accompanying Thomas on gentle rides across their now extensive property. The family expanded again when Grace was 3, with the birth of a son they named Samuel Thomas. A second daughter, Elizabeth, joined the family 2 years later, completing their home in ways Olivia had never dared to dream possible during her years of solitude. Silver Creek grew as well, transforming from a dusty frontier settlement into a proper town with a schoolhouse, a bank, and eventually a railway connection. The Ryders were respected as founding members of the community, their story of overcoming adversity to build a life together becoming something of a local legend. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Thomas surprised Olivia with a journey not east to the places of painful memories, but west to San Francisco, a city neither had seen. They left the children in the capable hands of Mrs. Peterson, now a doting honorary grandmother, and enjoyed 2 weeks of discovery together, walking arm in arm along the bay, marveling at the bustling cosmopolitan energy so different from their prairie home. Regrets. Thomas asked one evening as they watched the sunset from a hilltop overlooking the Pacific Ocean. About choosing Silver Creek over a city like this? Olivia shook her head, smiling at the man who had helped her find her voice again. Not one, everything I need is waiting for us at home. When they returned to their homestead, to the eager embraces of their children and the familiar comfort of the life they'd built together, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that her journey had led exactly where it was meant to. Sometimes in the quietest moments, watching Thomas teach Samuel to ride, or helping Grace braid Elizabeth's hair on the porch, Olivia would remember the frightened, silent woman who had once hidden behind a counter in a small apothecary. That woman seemed like someone from a story now, a character she had once played but no longer recognized. The real Olivia Ryder was here speaking, laughing, occasionally even singing as she worked in her garden or clinic. The real Olivia had found not just her voice but her purpose, her family, her home. And when she looked at Thomas, his hair now streaked with silver at the temples, but his blue eyes still bright with the same patience and understanding that had drawn her to him from the beginning, she knew that the greatest gift of all had been his willingness to wait through her silence, to believe that the words she would eventually speak were worth hearing. I love you, she told him each night as they fell asleep side by side in the home they had built together. Thank you for waiting for me to say it. and Thomas would smile in the darkness, drawing her close as he had on that first night in their cabin. "Some things," he would whisper, "are worth any wait."